everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to this GWI Water Data webinar. My name is Malin Headland. I'm the Water Data Manager at GWI, and with me today I've got my colleagues Luke Bratt, Lara Nash, Georgia Bottomley and Charlie Walker. I've got the agenda for today for you here. So in our sort of like 2024 outlook for the global water market, we'll basically explore some of the major issues currently on the minds of utilities and industrial end users in the water sector. So I'll start with an overview of our latest utility forecast, and I'll also talk a bit about water security as one of the key spending drivers in the water sector. And after that, we'll move on to look at the growing concerns about emerging contaminants and water pollution, which are leading to a greater focus on water quality. So Luke will tackle this from the perspective of PFAS in the United States. And then Lara will talk about the regulatory landscape in Europe, as well as a little bit about opportunities in water quality monitoring. Another topic we wanted to touch on today is the increasing interest in green hydrogen as part of the transition towards cleaner energy. And Georgia will cover some of the trends and top opportunities in that space. And finally, Charlie will be using some of our technology-related data, which we have on GWI Water Data, to look at how the landscape of technology is really evolving against the background of these pressures, looking at some key trends in tech investment as well as patent applications. So our presentation today will last around 50 minutes, and we will have some time for questions at the end. You'll be able to submit questions at any time during the session by using the side panel. So please feel free to do that. But there will also be time right at the end to send through anything. So to set the scene to start with, I wanted to begin with a quick overview of our utility capital expenditure forecast. So this graphic breaks down our forecast by region with market sizes for the next 5 years in the bars and the 2024-2029 compound annual growth rates in the circles. So some of the key things we've picked up on in our latest update is that we continue to expect solid growth in Europe in the blue bars. As regulations, but also increasingly water security concerns really drive spending. As mentioned, Lara will tell you more about the regulatory drivers, but there are also some key regional opportunities in reuse and leakage reduction, which I will mention as well. The Middle East and North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa in the green are expected to see the strongest utility capital spending growth up until 2029. These two regions are also expected to have the highest spending on the water side alongside Western Europe, so reflecting the landscape there. We are also expecting a strong growth rate for Latin America, but that is particularly on the wastewater side. While in Southern Asia, as you can see in the yellow bars, we currently expect a bit of a decrease in spending. That is because water-related spending in India, which is the region's biggest market, is expected to peak this year and fall from there with sort of like the big Jal Jeevan mission completing. But you can see that we do expect spending to trend upwards again from 2027 onwards. And it's worth noting that with India, there could also be new spending programs announced following the election this year. It's worth noting that despite the negative overall growth rate, spending on the wastewater side in Southern Asia is still really high at over 6%, with wastewater treatment build-outs as well as sludge management build-outs taking place. In East Asia Pacific, the largest regional market, we're expecting fairly even growth rates between water and wastewater. Reuse is playing a key role there in meeting strong industrial demand, but so does water resources spending and desalination spending, while reducing environmental pollution, particularly in sort of mega cities in emerging markets, also continues to stay quite high up on national agendas. So, as already mentioned, the sort of impression we're really having is that the increasing impacts of climate change is really bringing water security to the forefront of many people's minds in the water sector. And we wanted to illustrate briefly sort of the key top market opportunities we've been observing, looking at a regional basis here. Of course, preferred solutions will vary very much depending on location, water stress, and so on, and also from country to country. Generally, you'll see regions and countries looking towards a combination of different approaches, looking at both alternative water supply solutions like desalination and reuse, but also at sort of reducing leakage as well. So this map basically illustrates some of the top opportunities by region. It's not necessarily trying to measure these opportunities, but more illustrates some areas where we're currently expecting growing project opportunities. A few key trends to highlight. I would say we've got some new markets coming up. So for example, reuse and leakage detection are really emerging as key opportunities in the United States and Western Europe, respectively, in response to droughts, hot summers affecting regions which maybe haven't previously been thought of as hotspots for water security spending. In Europe, Southern Europe is the main location for opportunities, and reducing non-revenue water levels is really high on the priority list there. Although we are seeing that reuse is also becoming much more attractive. Meanwhile, the western parts of the United States are seeing a record number of municipalities pursuing water recycling schemes, with the bulk of activity there focused on indirect potable reuse. Also worth mentioning, maybe a little bit about the use of procurement models. So desalination procurement is increasingly making use of private finance, and that is happening even outside of the traditional GCC markets, which, as you may be aware, have done so for quite some time. So for example, both Egypt and Morocco are looking to use private finance for large-scale desalination projects. And desalination really remains a top market opportunity in the Middle East and North Africa region. I'm not going to go into too much detail about desalination today. That is more the territory of our desal data platform. But we are expecting a really strong boom in seawater desalination capacity to be awarded over the next 5 years. Obviously, amid the increasing water scarcity concerns, also really growth of desalination outside of the traditional markets. So for example, we are expecting desalination capacity to increase in Latin America as well as in Asia. You've also got country level examples like Spain, which is pursuing more desal projects as part of its water security drive. Although on the regional level, it's not necessarily a big opportunity in Europe as a whole. On the non-revenue water reduction side, there's quite a lot of interest in performance-based contracts in order to benefit from private sector expertise and investment. This is happening in, for example, Brazil, which is attempting to reduce non-revenue water in connection to the country's sanitation bill, but also in different markets in Africa, which are affected by high non-revenue water rates. And final mention, industrial demand is emerging as quite the key driver as well. So you've got industrial demand in China, leading to heavy investment in alternative water sources. But it's also now seeing other countries like Taiwan and India set their sights on reuse and desalination projects to supply industries, while mining water demand, alongside general water scarcity concerns, is spurring on desalination projects in Latin America. Before handing over to Lara, to Luke, sorry, I'm going to speak about a couple of different approaches to water security in a bit more detail. And I'll start by looking at non-revenue water reduction. So this graphic is lifted from our utilities dashboard on GWare water data, and it shows the average non-revenue water rate for countries where this data is available, and illustrating key markets which do need to focus on reducing water lost through leakage or which is not billed. And this is really creating opportunities for network rehabilitation, but also for digital solutions. And of course, aside from the aspect of saving water, improving utility finances will typically also be a strong driver. we are seeing that, for example, in Asia, China is seeing increasing adoption of digital technologies in order to reduce urban non-revenue water rates. As mentioned, in Africa, this is quite a priority. You can also see from the map that we've got a few different examples of fairly high non-revenue water rates, and countries increasingly looking to address these high rates with utilities and donors, often sort of launching dedicated programs for this purpose. What you can also kind of spot from this map is that Europe has some difference in non-revenue water rates between different countries. And obviously with water security now so high up the political agenda, reducing leakage has become quite a hot topic. So I'll just briefly talk about a few of the region's markets in more detail, looking at Southern Europe. So this graphic compares the actual non-revenue water rates in purple to the sort of set targets in yellow in some of Europe's southern markets. In Italy, which, as you can see, has the highest non-revenue water rate, as well as the biggest gap it needs to close in order to reach its targets. It is estimated that 3.5 billion euros of investment will be required until 2026 to reduce chronic leakage rates. And in Italy, you've got quite sort of large amounts of EU funding really spurring on project tenders. Meanwhile, in Spain, the country's strategic project for digitization of the water cycle is expected to include network improvements in its 1.7 billion euros expenditure program. France and Portugal, so in France, you've got an attempt to improve rates for poorly performing local authorities, while in Portugal, which also has a gap to close, there's a draft strategic water plan, which is sort of featuring the introduction of smart grids towards reducing leakage. So also, while reducing leakage, saving as much water as possible, it's becoming increasingly critical. This will often be coupled with an increasing focus on alternative water sources as well. We touched on diesel already, but before moving on, I just wanted to touch a little bit more about the reuse market. So this graphic breaks down the cumulative reuse capacity by sector for different regions. And overall, essentially, what we are seeing is that agricultural irrigation and sort of industrial use are the dominant reuse applications and responsible for a lot of the overall market growth. So you can see that, for example, in Middle East and North Africa, agricultural irrigation makes up a very sort of big share of the existing capacity. We've got, for example, Egypt awarding some big reuse for irrigation projects, but also moving forward, we're seeing, for example, Tunisia launching a DFI-backed project to facilitate reuse for agriculture. Reuse is also seeing multiple opportunities in sub-Saharan Africa, which is focusing more on reuse than on desalination. And in that part of the world as well, Namibia already has a direct potable reuse scheme in place. And this is what you can see in light blue in the bar representing sub-Saharan Africa. Meanwhile, it's already mentioned, industrial demand really acts as the key driver and also takes up the biggest share of capacity in East Asia Pacific. A lot of that capacity has been coming out of China, trying to hit reuse targets for 2025. And also in North America as well, so the drought concerns in the western parts of the United States are also sort of really expected to spur on new reuse projects going forward, looking at sort of the potable water recycling schemes. Most projects, as mentioned, will fall into the indirect potable reuse bracket, supported by a pipeline of projects in California. But there is also some sort of strong growing interest in direct potable reuse. Rulemaking efforts in Colorado, California, and Arizona have really sort of increased clarity for DPR projects, but challenges do remain, and sort of leveling up the monitoring and treatment technologies on offer will likely be required in order to make projects really feasible. Finally, on Europe, Europe is also seeing a growing focus on reuse. You've got, for example, on a country level, France outlining a plan to increase its reuse capacity by launching 1,000 new reuse projects by 2027. But you've also got, for example, the EU implementing its first union-wide common quality standards for agricultural water reuse in 2023. And we are going to hear a bit more about the sort of situation in the EU from Lara. But first, I am now going to hand over to Luke, who will be sort of speaking about a different set of regulations expected to create significant opportunities in the United States.
Thank you, Malin. So today I'm going to go into some more detail on one of the most significant investment drivers we're expecting to see over the next few years for US utilities, and that is PFAS. So PFAS are industrial chemicals that are set to be regulated for the first time under the Safe Drinking Water Act in 2027, and that's going to push hundreds of utilities across the country to upgrade their conventional treatment systems with more advanced technologies going forward. Now, other countries have made tentative steps towards introducing drinking water standards for PFAS, but the EPA's rules are especially significant given their stringency. The agency is proposing that only 4 parts per trillion of the 2 main types of PFAS, that's PFOA and PFOS, will be allowed in drinking water delivered to customers by 2027. And as PFAS regulations go, that is paralleled only by the likes of Denmark and Sweden, which Lara, our Europe editor, will go on to talk about a little bit later. To get down to these sort of contaminant levels will be a mammoth task in terms of both practicality and cost for water systems across the US. Next slide, please. So firstly, I wanted to take a moment to dive into some of the expected costs and funding opportunities associated with the new EPA PFAS regulations. Now, it's important to note that the EPA standards have come under fire from the industry, with industry representatives claiming that these standards are outrageously expensive. The American Water Works Association has been one of the most vocal critics here, and they suggest that the total cost for utilities to comply with the PFAS standards could top $3.2 billion annually. To put that figure in perspective, that's roughly a 10% increase in the total capital spent on treating drinking water in the US each year. This is about $2 billion more than the EPA actually thinks the rules will cost. They conducted their own analysis when they published their proposals and suggested that the maximum cost utilities would incur would be around $1.2 billion. So obviously a huge discrepancy between what the regulators are saying and what the industry is saying these regulations will cost. At GWI, we've charted a bit of a middle course between these two figures and also tried to provide a bit more of a targeted piece of analysis. So our focus is primarily on annual capital investments in treatment systems, and we're focusing on the years between 2023 and 2030. And within this time frame, we're expecting just under $10 billion will be spent on PFAS removal across the United States. Our estimates are based on 3 things: the sort of project data we're seeing coming out at the moment, some new testing data that is being published by the EPA, and also a cost model we've used from the EPA, which we've tweaked to remedy some issues that we previously identified regarding the impact of PFAS on smaller systems. As the industry as a whole sort of squabbles over the cost of these regulations, which we're expecting, the good news is that capital is being put on the table to fund a good chunk of the project activity going on. As you can see by the sort of green bubbles on the slide, there are sort of significant funding sources available. So firstly, on the table, we've got 3M and DuPont's recent drinking water settlements, which bring in over $11 billion of capital for municipalities facing PFAS treatment costs. And that adds to roughly $9 billion already available through the bipartisan infrastructure law. That's the huge spending package introduced by Biden a couple of years ago. Additionally to this, we're really on course to see much more money released through further litigation. There are some municipalities who are looking to pursue their own claims against PFAS manufacturers outside of the 3M and DuPont settlements which were announced. And we're also expecting to see litigation with industrial PFAS users. So those are not necessarily PFAS producers, but companies that use fluorinated compounds in their manufacturing processes. So all in all, despite the debates over how much the EPA's regulations are going to cost utilities, the funding landscape is looking pretty healthy at the moment, and the EPA's rules are not entirely unfunded. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, GWI expect around 10 billion to be spent over the next 6 years or so on PFAS treatment systems. And there are two real indicators as to where we expect this 10 billion of capital to go. The first one of these indicators is PFAS testing data. Now, there's been a lot of testing for PFAS going on over previous years, starting as early as 2012. But the best current picture we have comes from UCMR5. That's the 5th round of the EPA's flagship contaminant monitoring program. And for each round of testing, the EPA basically asks water suppliers to test their water for a selection of contaminants. And the 5th iteration, the data we see here, runs from 2023 to 2025 and focuses on PFAS. So what's interesting about this data and what makes this data particularly powerful is that we can see within these results exactly how prepared utilities are across the country to meet the EPA's new drinking water standards of 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS. Although it's important to note there are some footnotes to the data you can see in front of you. Firstly, only around 17,000 tests for PFAS have been done so far in UCMR5. That's about 24% of the total tests expected to be done through to 2025. So although we have got a big chunk of results, there is still a huge amount of water systems yet to submit their samples. What this also means is there are some big regional disparities in the volume of tests currently submitted. So while a state like California has tested roughly 300 water systems for PFAS, lots of states in the central US, that sort of pale area, just haven't done enough tests to draw many conclusions as of yet. Nevertheless, as you can see from the map in front of you, the big compliance challenges are already beginning to congregate on the East Coast in states like Florida, New Jersey, New York, states with historically big industrial bases. And here, compliance rates with the EPA's proposed rule are low. About 40 to 60% of suppliers in these states would be out of compliance with the EPA's proposed 4 parts per trillion rules. This is well above the early national average we're seeing of around 16% non-compliance. So potentially big investments are heading to the East Coast for PFAS removal from drinking water once these regulations hit. On the West Coast, conversely, in places like California, we have slightly less alarming potential compliance rates with the EPA's rule, although of course it is still early days in terms of those results coming in. Also, when we look at this data, we need to really consider the extent to which sample results impact investment needs. So if a utility detects PFOA and PFOS at something like 5, 6, 7 parts per trillion, it will be flagged up on this map in front of us, but doesn't necessarily mean that water system has to install a state-of-the-art PFAS treatment system. We are already seeing a lot of more agile, smaller systems, blending multiple supplies to reduce PFAS concentrations, or simply drilling new wells if that option's on the table. So I think the big takeaway from this map is generally 2 things. More utilities are finding PFAS than previously thought, but again, more time and tests are really needed before we make bigger conclusions as to what this suggests about future activity in the PFAS market. Next slide, please. The best way to really get a grip on the project activity that's happening on the ground at the moment is to consult data from state revolving funds. Now, state revolving funds are the main mechanisms by which utilities apply for federal funding for their projects. That federal funding includes money made available under the bipartisan infrastructure law. So across these state revolving funds, these funding mechanisms, we've really seen a ramp up in requests for funding for PFAS related projects. And for the first time this year, we sifted through roughly 15,000 project applications and identified 270 PFAS related projects seeking funding in 2023. And combined, these projects represent at least 2.9 billion of opportunity. So a breakdown of the dollar value and count of PFAS projects in the top 10 states is shown on the slide in front of you. Now, a lot of these projects obviously are anticipating the EPA's upcoming MCLs, with California topping the table when it comes to projected spend. California has been especially proactive in identifying funding needs, and we've also seen a few utilities there consider projects in light of state legislation. Conversely, on the East Coast, the sort of contamination levels we saw in the previous slide is really being matched with robust project activity. Here we see big spending plans outlined in states like Massachusetts and New York. But what's interesting as we travel from coast to coast, as we travel from east to west, the technology priorities for treating PFAS are varying significantly. In the West, ion exchange resins are typically used in vessel-based systems to remove PFAS from drinking water, whereas in the East, it's really activated carbon that's dominating the project picture. We think a big distinguishing factor here is water quality. In the East, there's a lot of manganese and iron co-contamination, which would foul ion exchange resins without pre-treatment, whereas a lot of these concerns aren't relevant in states like California, which really opens the door to ion exchange. The economic case between the two technologies, between ion exchange and activated carbon, is a little bit more complex. The right technology choice is often decided on a case-by-case basis following feasibility studies at treatment plants. And while there are certain capex advantages that could come with ion exchange systems, the full life cycle costs of activated carbon can sometimes be cheaper, given its ability to be reactivated and reused in treatment systems up to 8 times. For other treatment technologies, the economics just doesn't seem to be there yet. There's a lot of talk about things like regenerable ion exchange resins breaking into the market, but single-use resins seem to have a significant cost advantage at the moment. Membrane systems, especially RO, have also been touted as strong candidates for PFAS treatment, but here concerns around waste disposal is really dissuading municipalities from pressing ahead. With activated carbon and ion exchange very much at the helm, the big question now is, can suppliers keep up? Can the supply side of the market keep a lid on price escalation and cater to the 10 billion of demand GWI expects to form over the next 6 years or so? Now, we've had assurances from leading suppliers that the sort of capacity concerns we saw following COVID have been overplayed, especially on the activated carbon side. I know a few activated carbon players, including Calgon, have just opened new manufacturing facilities in the US, but only time will really tell how the spike in demand we expect to see will impact costs associated with PFAS treatment. In the US, we're still really in a seller's market, and it's very reasonable to expect that the continuing imbalance we're seeing between supply and demand is going to filter through to a lot of these PFAS projects going forward. Over to Laura now to talk about water quality investments in Europe.
Thanks, Luke. As Luke said, I'm going to be discussing sort of key European regulatory changes and how they're driving water quality standards to increase, among other improvements. And then I'll be presenting our water quality monitoring forecast. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Here we've laid out the key EU legislation affecting the water sector, organized the application by the application it affects most, with the European parliamentary elections coming up in June and the current European legislative period coming to a close. This is a good time to sum up the changes and highlight the aspects that we think will be creating the most interesting market opportunities. So starting on the left, the big legislation impacting municipal water is the Drinking Water Directive, which sets standards for PFAS levels, amongst other things. The EU-wide level of 100 parts per trillion for the sum of 20 PFAS by 2026 typically won't require additional treatment. However, in Denmark, Sweden, and Germany, there are more stringent limits set for PFAS 4, which will need more substantial action. Here, activated carbon is the dominant treatment method so far, due largely to its familiarity and cost effectiveness, while ion exchange and RO are seeing opportunities when specific facility factors make them cheaper. Outside of PFAS, the Drinking Water Directive also introduces other parameters such as disinfection byproducts and BPA. It also prioritizes leakage management by requiring countries to assess and report leakage levels, and encourages real-time monitoring of water quality for better risk management. PFAS is also being addressed through the revision of the surface and groundwater pollutants list, which is aiming to avoid the high drinking water treatment costs by making EU countries responsible for limiting discharges at source. This also adds certain pharmaceuticals, pesticides, and other emerging contaminants to the list. If adopted, industrial and agricultural users will likely have to adjust practices or implement more advanced wastewater treatment measures to comply during the 2028 to 2033 river basin management plans. Moving swiftly to the wastewater sector, the rewrite of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive significantly increases the standards from 30 years ago, which notably many countries have yet to comply with. Still, the introduction of fourth stage treatment for micropollutants at large facilities will require advanced treatment installations of activated carbon and ozone. And the combination of the two is emerging so far as the preferred solution. This isn't required until 2045, however. So although some leading utilities will begin installation sooner, the majority will be upgraded at a later stage. More immediate growth, however, surrounds the higher effluent quality monitoring requirements, as I'll discuss more on the next slide, and the more stringent standards for nutrient removal by 2039, with intermediary targets of 2033, which is expected to drive growth for chemical and biological treatment in the medium term. Along with this revision, the new regulation on water reuse, as Malin mentioned, is making reuse more palatable by setting common standards and reducing trade barriers to agriculture produced with reused water. This is beginning to have practical effects in countries, including Italy, where direct agricultural reuse has been very uncommon previously, but 24 reuse projects are being planned now, with a further 40 under consideration. For industry, I've highlighted 3 key regulations: the revised Industrial Emissions Directive, or IED, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD, and the EU taxonomy. The IED revision introduces binding limits for water use to be set in future industrial permits, as well as requirements for companies to make water stewardship plans, which is further required through the new CSRD. So both regulations are driving substantial increases in the public availability of data on both water use and plans for improvement. So that's allowing for better comparison between competitor companies. This is also complemented by the EU taxonomy, which provides a categorization system for sustainable economic activities that support water management. This combination of legislation is thus designed specifically to drive green investment. So we expect them to expand the markets for water management and reuse technologies in European industry. And next slide, please. Thank you. Here we have our revised water quality sensors forecast for Western Europe, in which we found both EU and UK regulatory changes to be a strong driver for growth. Global drivers like increasing interest in process optimization and extending membrane lifespans are still relevant, however. So as can be seen here, the region is seeing a strong growth rate of nearly 10%, which is led by the UK's 11.7% growth rate. And that's due to the massive rollout of water quality monitoring at wastewater treatment plant outlets and combined sewer overflow sites across England, as required by the Environment Act 2021. This requires monitoring of turbidity, pH, temperature, BOD, and ammonia at sites at a near real-time rate by 2035. To reach this, a total spend of £718 million is expected between 2025 and 2030, based on company business plans. Notably, this rollout includes a lot of more remote CSO locations, in which fixed unit analyzers are less feasible and extending maintenance intervals is ideal. Additionally, many existing nutrient monitoring systems are reliant on costly reagents, so innovation to reduce either the maintenance needs or reagent use will be very appealing to the sector at this time. In the EU, the Urban Wastewater Directive is also driving growth, with requirements to monitor for microplastics, health parameters, and antimicrobial resistance, as well as more frequent monitoring of BOD, COD, TSS, nutrients, and pollutants, which includes micropollutants and PFAS. Requiring monitoring of all these parameters at wastewater treatment plants, as well as a representative sample of CSO discharge points, is expected to drive up demand for water quality sensors. And meanwhile, more real-time monitoring by drinking water producers is also providing growth for advanced devices. Finally, more reuse in both industry and within utilities is going to require more monitoring to manage risks and ensure the safety of reclaimed water. So that further expands the market for water quality sensors in this region. That concludes my section, however, so I'll pass over to my colleague, Georgia, to talk about green hydrogen.
Thanks, Laura. So today I'm going to be sharing with you some of the key takeaways from our most recent update to our green hydrogen research, which includes updated estimates of water demand for this market by 2030, our analysis of water sourcing and electrolyzer type choices, and a closer look at the electrolyzer feed water treatment requirements. So between 2022 and 2023, GWI's calculation of additional water demand for electrolytic hydrogen production by 2030 increased by almost double, as our project list has increased from around 700 projects to over 1,000. So the updated total estimate is 3.9 million cubic meters per day of additional demineralized water for the electrolysis process. While more than half of the projects on our list are located in Western Europe and Australia, new project developments are expanding the geographical landscape of green hydrogen. For example, in Colombia, in Latin America, and in India, where governments have announced fiscal incentives and national hydrogen strategies, the number of projects has grown exponentially. In North Africa, where project developers can benefit from strong solar power resources, large-scale new projects have also been announced in Morocco, Egypt, and Mauritania. As confidence grows in green hydrogen's potential as an energy carrier, planned projects are growing in scale. So looking more closely at the announced projects, the average size has increased to 98,000 tonnes per year of hydrogen, when compared to last year's 79,000 tonnes per year. So on this slide, we have a list of the top 10 green hydrogen projects scheduled to come online by 2030 that have declared a source of water. Of the countries on this list, you can see that Chile and Australia have led the charge with multiple gigawatt scale projects that are planned to take advantage of the solar and wind power potential afforded by their respective geographies. If we look at the locations of the projects as a whole on this list, it's notable that they're all in countries that have arid conditions, and therefore sourcing water is a significant challenge for them. Hythen Hydrogen's Namibia project and the green ammonia project in South Africa's Nelson Mandela Bay are evidence of strong potential for sub-Saharan green hydrogen. The renewable energy potential in this region is significant, and international collaboration is facilitating the necessary infrastructure for green hydrogen. For example, the government of Namibia has signed memoranda of understanding with Germany, the Netherlands, and the EU. Blended financing vehicles like SDG Namibia 1, which hopes to raise €1 billion in capital, and South Africa's SAH2, which is targeting $1 billion, are also contributing to an expanding green hydrogen market in this region. It will also escape nobody's notice that the water source for the largest 10 projects with declared water sources is desalinated seawater. Again, water scarcity concerns drive this choice. And it must also be noted that where desalination is the logical solution for accessing water, an early decision has to be made to facilitate the infrastructure and construct a treatment facility for said feed water. So this year we've been able to do a bit of deeper analysis of our projects list, looking at how trends in selection of water source and electrolyzer type have changed year on year. Most of the projects that are tracked by the International Energy Agency do not specify a source of water. Of over 1,000 projects on our list, only 4% have indicated this, and this proportion is down from 9% in 2022, which indicates to us that in comparison to the increasing number of project announcements, attention towards water has stagnated. The limited number of projects that have declared their water source highlights an area where improvement is desperately needed. In the absence of early consideration of water availability and alternative solutions, projects can fail. One obvious example of this is the 6-gigawatt Mulawatana green hydrogen project in South Australia, which was cancelled in 2022 due to issues with water supply. Out of the 4% of projects that have declared their water source, over half will be opting for desalinated seawater, and this represents an increase from last year's share. We can see a clear trend towards desalination as the preferred source of water for hydrogen production, so as not to compete with human consumption or existing industrial demand. Not only in water-scarce regions like Australia and Latin America, where a significant portion of projects are being developed, but also in countries such as Poland and the UK that have not traditionally relied on desalination as much. Desalination is also the ideal choice for projects that are located in coastal or port areas. When looking at the choices of electrolyzer for these projects, there's not been a lot of change year on year in developers' preferences. Proton exchange membrane, or PEM electrolyzers, remain the most popular choice, followed by alkaline electrolysis, while solid oxide electrolysis continues to break into the market. Present in more than half of the projects, PEM electrolyzers tend to require more stringent water quality standards as they're more sensitive to contaminants when compared to alkaline electrolyzers. As PEM electrolyzers feature hot water recirculation loops, they require an additional polishing step to maintain water quality, as the heat of the water can mean that contaminants leach from piping at a faster rate over time. The alkaline electrolyzer, which was traditionally the most mature technology on the market, employs a liquid electrolyte solution, which is most commonly either potassium hydroxide or sodium hydroxide, which must be replaced over a period of 6 to 8 years, which brings concentrated brine management solutions into the equation to deal with this waste stream. Both the choice of water source and the electrolyzer will have implications on water treatment. For example, seawater desalination will most likely require additional treatment steps when compared to using fresh water or municipal water. Feed water for electrolysis has to be of sufficiently high quality so that it doesn't foul the electrodes, or in the case of PEM electrolysis, the membrane. Generally, demineralized water is the standard, but water is often further treated to ultra-pure quality to ensure the longevity and efficiency of the electrolyzer. While there's no set standard for water quality, electrolyzer manufacturers' general recommendation is to comply with the American Society for Testing and Materials, or ASTM, reagent-grade water standards, specifically Type 2. This diagram shows the treatment train for electrolyzer feed water coming from municipal or freshwater sources, to give an idea of the type of technologies that are generally employed prior to electrolysis. For small-scale green hydrogen projects of below about 10 megawatts, some electrolyzer providers provide integrated water treatment units on their electrolyzer skids. But for larger projects, project developers have to account for a pre-treatment train for electrolyzer feed water. As you can see, this is going to bring opportunities for membrane technologies such as ultrafiltration and reverse osmosis, as well as ion exchange and electrodeionization. Already, ion exchange and electrodeionization products that are geared specifically towards green hydrogen are entering the water treatment market as companies seek to capitalize on the popularity of green hydrogen. The involvement of a water treatment provider at an early stage of green hydrogen project development offers huge potential cost and energy savings. Recommendations for ASTM Type 2 water are designed to preserve the electrolyzer as much as possible, but they also bring some unnecessary considerations. For example, while endotoxin removal is recommended by the ASTM standards, these have no actual impact on the electrolyzer, and therefore treating for this parameter would be pointless overtreatment. For projects using seawater desalination, there will also likely be further opportunities for brine management technologies, such as crystallizers, as well as high recovery reverse osmosis systems, as projects will favor maximum water recovery. A better understanding of water requirements will also enable developers to factor in treatment costs at an earlier stage, which means that water can be considered earlier in the process and makes these projects more likely to reach final investment decision and become operational. The green hydrogen market is undoubtedly expanding fast. This doesn't come without risks. Adverse investment conditions and delays in the anticipated reduction of the cost of hydrogen have resulted in project cancellations over the past few months. Green hydrogen has great potential as an energy carrier to stabilize renewable energy supplies and will be key to the energy transition. With water playing an integral role in hydrogen production, the opportunities for water technologies to play a part in the energy transition are bright. I'll now pass you on to my colleague, Charlie.
Great, thanks, Georgia. So I'll take us through analysis of growth capital flows into water technology and also patent applications, what we saw last year compared to 2022. So on the water data platform, we've got a data set of all the deals involving growth capital, with growth equity flows since 2018. And so I'm just going to present some sort of financial trends here and then move on to sort of deals by theme. So on the top chart here, we can see the total rate, total investment over the previous few years. And it's a really nice trend towards more money coming into early stage water companies. Naturally, 2020 was going to be a low point, but it's rebounded pretty nicely over the last 3 years. In 2023, the amount just exceeded $750 million, and we've already stormed out the gates in 2024. So in the first quarter, we've seen some big deals for companies like 120 Water and Avanor Sync, and just today we saw 30 million going into Nanostone. So we seem to be keeping up momentum so far. And so for that number for 2024 already equates to half the amount of 2020. So that's what I'm showing there. And while climate technology venture capital as a whole, or indeed a lot of VC markets cooled off in 2023, water remained pretty resilient. And I think we're really seeing investors recognize the need for climate adaptation technologies, and water is a huge part of this. So I'm confident that we'll see continued strength in funding into water over the next at least 3 to 5 years, given that water is such a huge part of that climate play. So on the chart at the bottom left here, looking at the average size of funding rounds, and there's more encouraging signs here for growth capital. Trends on the up, 2021 and 2022. Slowed down a little bit in 2023, but still good fundamentals there. Now, the numbers are slightly skewed by some really sizable deals for companies like Source Global, the water generator company, and Gradient Corporation, the water's first unicorn. So we took these out to see how it affected the numbers, and the chart on the right came out. So it means the average for 2023 did dip slightly, but I still think we're heading in the right direction. And in 2023, there were 18 other deals in the double-digit million range. And that compares to 13 in 2022 and 15 in 2021. So it is a little difficult to assess the size of very specific rounds. So, you know, whether it be a seed round or a Series B, for example. So we've just done our best with what we can. But you know, the overall picture is looking pretty good. So we also, our data set, we've developed a taxonomy to categorize these deals depending on what the company that's receiving the investment does. And this is an ongoing process, but this is what we're using at the moment. And while this chart does show some trends since 2020 in terms of the number of deals relative to the themes, I am going to focus on 2023. The new numbers remain strong, just over 100 there. And you know, going back to 2018, we've got over 600 deals here. But yeah, so 2023, just over 100, so good, consistent numbers. And picking out a few themes where are bold on the left-hand side of the page here. So PFAS removal and destruction really sort of surged onto the scene in 2023. Naturally reflecting how we're on the cusp of a big build out of PFAS treatment. And while we probably see more money going towards destruction technologies, you know, like oxidation and so on, alternative technologies to the more established removal, like ion exchange or activated carbon, alternatives to those are also gaining traction. So for example, adsorbents offered by Pure Affinity and the company EcoSpheres, for example. So I think this shows that simple removal technologies are not yet yesterday's news and still attracting interest in investment. The other thing that exploded last year and indeed this year already is direct lithium extraction. Of course, the hype around this thanks to lithium's role in the clean energy transition. And although the market has crashed recently, you know, we will likely see a shakeout of technologies pretty soon. So I think here investors need to look increasingly beyond the simple or long-term lithium demand. You know, it means dollar signs when lithium extraction technologies rock up at their door. I think it's a battle of the direct lithium extraction technologies such as adsorption, ion exchange, solvent extraction, a little bit of membranes there as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out, probably over the next 12 to 18 months. Now, Halliburton Labs has invested $30 million into an Israeli direct lithium extraction firm called Extralit, which is using ion exchange. So, you know, Halliburton seems to have nailed their flag to that technology mast in the lithium play. So that's quite interesting. There's also ongoing interest in membrane treatment, as we might imagine, and this includes membranes related to desalination. I've got a desalination category at the bottom. It's quite small. A lot of that is actually going into membrane treatment. There's not a lot of, we haven't seen so much action into, you know, kind of alternatives to reverse osmosis, for example. I think there was a big kind of interest in those kinds of companies a few years ago, but that's slowed recently. So in membranes, it's quite often, you know, just doing new materials or coatings and things like that. And there's some really interesting companies there, like Membrion and Zvisico out of the US. So that's always a very consistent theme, and it's held up last year. On the digital side, that's always been pretty strong in recent years. And the big theme for 2023 was real-time water risk analysis platforms. So firms like Waterplan, Divarod, attracting investment. I think Divarod from GHD. And demand management, and whether that was irrigation efficiency or leak detection, was also a top theme. I think going forward in the near to medium term, I think we're going to see some more action into condition assessment technologies, leak detection technologies. Seeing this already, such as AI-assisted CCTV systems from people like Sewer AI, Vapor, for example. And a recent report from Utah State University of US utilities suggested that those utilities simply don't have the funding to replace pipes that are thought to be beyond useful life. So a better understanding of those assets is really critical and lends itself well to condition assessment. And then also with water quality monitoring, it sort of dipped a little bit in 2023, but I think we'll see more of that going forward. As you know, we talked about in this webinar, stricter monitoring regimes in UK and the EU, and a real relentless drive towards reuse, and particularly potable reuse, where quality monitoring will be ultra critical. And there's developments around real-time microbial monitoring and more rapid inspection of emerging contaminants like PFAS that are going to they're poised to make their mark, we believe. So that's that. Also looking at the types of VCs that are in the space. I think 2023 saw a resurgence in corporate venture capital, who are often injecting capital alongside seasoned sector specialists like Burnt Island Ventures, Pure Terra, etc. So we saw some water corporates like Veolia, Curita, Avivo get involved, as well as others like Samsung, Novo Nordisk, Engie, some big lithium majors coming in, SQM, looking at direct lithium extraction space, unsurprisingly, but also SQM also invested in a Chilean provider of water systems for remote communities, which I think is a good reminder of how these mines really still have their need a social license to operate. And I also think that as an uptick in sort of impact venture capital, that kind of covers climate tech. So, for example, like Emerald was very involved in 2023, making 3 separate deals. Circular Capital, which is focused on the circular economy, invested in ceramic membrane company Serafiltech. And I think as with water's role being better understood in the climate play, I think we're seeing more and more self-styled climate tech VCs entering the space. Most prominently, Clean Energy Ventures put more money into aqua membranes, the 3D printed RO membrane spacer firm. So Clean Energy put more money into them last year after originally investing in them in 2020. And Octopus Ventures, a big sort of European name, backed Pure Affinity, who I mentioned earlier, who has the PFAS absorbent. So yeah, it's encouraging signs for sort of climate tech show there. So finally, wrapping up with patents. So looking sort of further beyond the horizon, as we say, in terms of emerging technologies, this chart shows a comparison of the top 15 technology tag interest areas for 2023 versus 2022 in our patent tracker application database. And for each of these categories, it's just showing the percentage of the total sample size. So we can see that topics that remained interesting last year: RO membranes and RO systems. And that includes innovative membrane compositions and new ways of operating these systems to achieve higher recovery. And I think for RO in particular, a large number of new ideas is a usual occurrence due to the wide range of complex feed waters it's treating, and a really strong driver to further reduce the cost of desalinated water and reuse. I think membrane cleaning was also a theme that remained strong in 2023. Ongoing market push towards protecting membranes by avoiding harsh cleaning chemicals. So a number of patent applications feature things like micro and nanobubble innovations to help clean the membranes. Also, polymeric MFE of membranes is also obviously top of the list there. Still a big theme. Looking at ways of just increasing robustness and integrity and so on. Another key driver of innovation is of course increasing concern around PFAS. We've heard a lot about that in this webinar. And so the names in green on the slide here all relate to advanced oxidation processes, which a big theme of how to remove PFAS and also hard to treat industrial wastewaters as well. And I think within these technologies, it's increasingly popular for the applicants they're looking at novel ways to bring the cost of these technologies down, as well as keeping up with the treatment of even newer emerging contaminants. So there's a strong showing there for sort of oxidation type technologies. Finally, so bioelectrochemical systems emerged in 2023. sort of halfway up the list there. Wasn't a theme so much in 2022. This involves things like microbial fuel cells, microbial electrolysis cells. So obviously, trying to use wastewater as a source of energy, fitting into the circular economy theme. And I think as these technologies have been applied in the field, they haven't actually turned out that it generates a high amount of energy, but they can help facilities meeting any energy targets and so on. So I think the market is accepting these, and they can effectively treat certain industrial wastewater streams. So that's probably a strong theme for the future. So I'll wrap up there, and I'll hand back to my colleague Molly.
Thank you very much, Charlie. So yes, that's the end of our presentation today. If you do have any final questions, please feel free to submit those now. We will be sending out slides through email to all attendees, so you will receive those. And you can also get in touch with us later for any further questions. But yeah, so the data and analysis you will have seen in today's sessions, this was largely drawn directly from the GWI Water Data Platform. Usually all of these insights will be reserved only for our subscribers. So we really hope this little glimpse into some of the key takeaways from our recent research has helped illustrate exactly the scale of our coverage. If you would like to find out more about the platform, you can use the QR code on the slide. It will take you to a resources center, which has got loads of helpful demo videos and guides to explore. Obviously, we've got a full-time team of analysts adding insights to the platform, so whichever markets you're interested in, there'll be plenty of interesting content you can explore. And in the big graphic to the right of the slide, you also have an overview of the different areas we cover water data in our forecasts, different industries, technology areas, and applications. So with that, let us have a look at some of the questions we've had come in. We'll try to answer a few. If there are any we don't have time with, we will get back to you over email. Don't worry. So I will start with a question about leakage reduction and whether we have sort of a graphic specific to sub-Saharan Africa. We do not, however, on water data, we do have obviously loads more analysis on non-renewable water reduction, so the general impact on utilities, strategies utilities are using to approach this problem. We do have obviously our utilities database with utilities by country. You can definitely go through sub-Saharan Africa there, look at utility non-revenue water rates by country as well. There's a lot more to explore in terms of leakage reduction by region as well. We also had quite a few questions come in about the United States and PFAS. I think, Luke, would you like to clarify in a bit more detail about the financial impact slide? Is the impact on utilities only? Is it for drinking water only, or also other applications?
Yeah, no problem. So our forecast and our slides relate to the drinking water section of the market. We were only focusing on the impact of the EPA's drinking water regulations in this webinar. Although we do expect the wastewater side, both the sort of wastewater treatment plants and biosolids, as well as industrial wastewater treatment needs to eventually develop. It's all in line with sort of the EPA's PFAS roadmap to clamp down on PFAS discharges through industrial wastewater, and also assess the impact of PFAS in biosolids. So although drinking water has emerged as the sort of unmatched market for PFAS treatment solutions, we're keeping a close eye on other areas of the water market that will be impacted further down the line.
Thank you. We'll go for another question on PFAS as well in the United States. What do environmental labs have to say about analyzing for the new PFAS standards in terms of capability and cost?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think here at GWI, we for a long time assumed the sort of capacity constraints going forward will come from the treatment media side of the market. There won't be enough sort of physical treatment systems in place, given the surge in demand. But what's actually happening is that environmental labs are beginning to sound some of the alarms that the capacity just isn't there to test water for PFOA and PFOS and handle the big spike in samples we're expecting to see once the EPA proposals are finalised in the next few weeks. There are staffing problems at laboratories. PFAS tests are sort of highly technical and expensive to carry out. So in theory, although the surge in demand we expect should be a massive opportunity for these environmental labs to boost their revenue and test more, there are some real practical limitations on how much they can step up to meet this demand. And it's something we're looking at going forward. It's something the EPA themselves seem to have underestimated in their own analysis when they put the rule forward. But it should really reach ahead over the next few months when utilities start to test more.
Thank you, Luke. We've had a couple of questions relating to Europe as well. Lara, would you like to comment on whether Switzerland has a PFAS target or not?
Sure. Yeah, so Switzerland had previous PFAS targets that were less stringent, and they're now being revised to match the EU-wide 100 parts per trillion PFAS limit, so they can be consistent in their regulatory stance. So they're not going for the lower, more stringent levels that we're seeing in some countries. They're sticking with the EU-wide level by 2026 still. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think we had a question on reuse in Italy as well and the sort of latest trend there. Do you want to go into a bit more detail about that one, the amount of planned projects and so on?
Yes, happy to answer that too. Yeah, so in Italy, direct reuse in agriculture has been previously very uncommon. It's mostly been indirect agricultural reuse. But the numbers I mentioned there was that there are, let me make sure I get them the right way around, 24 reuse projects being planned now, with a further 40 under consideration. And that's based on some surveys done by Utilitalia of different water utilities in Italy for what their plans are for water reuse. And it's a topic that I've actually recently written an article for a GWI magazine about in a lot more detail. So it might be worth looking into that if anyone's particularly interested in the Italian reuse market. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Lara. We'll take a question on green hydrogen as well, I think. Georgia, are there any plans for direct seawater electrolysis for green hydrogen?
That's a really good question. We didn't see any on our projects list. However, I am aware of a few kind of university level studies in Australia, a couple of trials that have been made for this technology, particularly in the Asia Pacific region. I haven't seen any projects that are looking to use direct seawater electrolysis at scale for green hydrogen production, mainly because the main bulk of total capex in a green hydrogen project is the electrolyzer. So projects tend to want to protect the electrolyzer as much as possible by using some water treatment on that seawater.
Thanks very much. I think we've got time for a couple of quick questions on the technology side as well before wrapping up. So Charlie, we've had one come in. What does the future of inland desalination look like? What challenges must be overcome?
Yes, so I think yes, it's a very good question with the plans for growing interest in potable reuse in the US. But of course, well, the headline challenge, of course, is brine that you're going to generate and how you dispose of that. But I just wanted to add, we're going to be looking into an alternative, prospects for an alternative technology known as carbon-based advanced treatment. So looking at using biological active filters and and actually carbon, and sort of there's quite elaborate treatment trains that actually don't use RO, so you're not going to be creating a nasty brine. So that's something in the pipeline over the next month or two.
Cool, and we've got one more question as well. Could you please clarify who the lead technology providers are for oxidation systems?
Yeah, so obviously there's a few all sorts of different types of oxidation. So what we'll do is I'm happy to get back to you on that. With a sort of a few of the key players in the different realms. Happy to do that.
Thank you very much. We have more questions, but I think we are a bit over time, so I think we'll probably wrap the session up here. If you've asked a question which we have not addressed on this call, don't worry, we will aim to get back to you over email in the next couple of days with a response. So you definitely will receive an answer. But yes, thank you all so much for tuning in today. We really hope you've found this webinar informative, useful, and hopefully you will explore a bit more about GWI water data on the Resources Centre. If you have further questions, do not hesitate to use either the Resources Centre or just get in touch with us directly, and we'll be more than happy to help. But yeah, thanks once again for joining us today, for asking questions. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and bye for now.